Fluttershy slumped against her door, letting the cool breeze of the early evening wash over her. After Sombra had fallen asleep, she had gone out to perform her usual duties, tending to the animals, feeding them, caring for the sick and injured. The sense of normality it gave her was a relief. She was able to pretend, for a little while, that she did not have a hang pony's noose around her neck every moment of the day. Of course, Fluttershy had ensured there were several small sandwiches by Sombra's bedside and a pitcher of cool water in case he woke up before she came back. Fortunately, Angel Bunny had been out of doors when Sombra had arrived, off playing with his bunny friends. Somehow she had managed to convince him that she was caring for a sick pony in the house, and that he should probably stay outside as not to disturb him. This much was true. Angel would have smelled a lie a mile away, but she also feared what Sombra might do to her little Angel Bunny. She knew the little dear could be a teensy bit abrasive, and considering who Sombra was, Fluttershy didn't want to chance him lashing out at the little one. Walking back into her house, her chores finished, the animals fed and tended to, Fluttershy crawled up onto the couch and stared at the stallion who was sleeping in the middle of her living room. She had a guest bedroom, although it wasn't exactly fit for royalty. Her bed currently wouldn't fit Sombra's physique. Fluttershy counted herself lucky she had the spare mattress still. She hadn't had a bed large enough for it since she moved to Ponyville, and living alone, she hadn't ever had a need for it. Picking up one of the sandwiches she had laid out, Fluttershy munched on it softly as she stood up and moved to the guest room. Moving quietly by rote, as not to disturb her guest, with a flick of her wing she pushed the door to the room open. It was a little dusty, but the floor space was large enough to accommodate a bigger bed. She would probably have to remove the large end table, but the dresser could stay if she moved it to the north wall. On a whim, Fluttershy went to the closet and pulled out a duster, some lemon-scented spray, and began tidying up the room. In the darkness, Sombra dreamed. This was his realm, he reveled in it. The shadows coiled around her etheric form, welcoming him back to his true kingdom. He had not been in this place between the walls asleep for well over 1,000 years, not since his banishment along with the Crystal Empire. It felt good to be back in a place unhindered by flesh. His spirit soared among the liquid emotions of his world. Here he was a master of his art, and something was missing. The notion struck Sombra like a hammer to a brass bell. Gathering power around him, he propelled his thought form through the rolling sea of motion until he reached his destination, the Gate of Horn. It was bent and torn as if something had shredded through it. A cold weight formed in Sombra's chest. On one hoof, clearly this happened some time ago, so the fact that the world was still spinning meant someone must have solved this little issue. On the other, the gate was still shattered, meaning that what dwelt beyond it was still roaming free in some way. Sombra swarmed up to the gate and examined the markings. They were old, very old. Of course, time didn't always mean the same thing in this realm as it did in the waking world, but the Gate of Horn was an island of calm in the torment that surrounded it, so the passage of time could be mostly relied upon. How soon after his banishment did this happen, and how? Who else? No, that wasn't even a question. Only one entity knew their way around this place like he did. Well, no matter. This wasn't his problem any longer. Still, it would do to quiet the mouse. Fluttershy, that was her name. Surely she would have heard of something of this magnitude, be it in a history book or otherwise. The process of waking was fitful and indelicate. Sombra's time in the wells of madness had blunted his once flawless technique. He counted through the innumerons of dawn, slowly anchoring his mind and soul back into his slumbering form. He felt rejuvenated by the journey, but still there was much to do yet, and his body was far from healed. With a final utterance, he felt his body slide back into sync with his mind, and his eyes snapped open. It was well into evening, and he could hear the faint, lovely humming of his newest servant, coming from somewhere down the hall of her cottage. Glancing over, Sombra saw that she had placed a bowl of soup and a plate of bread, relatively recent by the smell of both, near him, alongside another pot of that wonderful tea. Either her timing was impeccable, or she had continually renewed the food near him in case he woke. Either one spoke well of her instincts. Suddenly ravenous, Sombra seized the bowl and began to drink down the rich vegetable broth. Seizing the bread, he tore off chunks of it, letting his sharp teeth shred the soft crust. Peasant fare for certain, but no less delicious. Idly, Sombra wondered how much of that was due to his long entrapment, and how much due to his host's culinary talents. A measure of both, he surmised. "Oh, you're awake. I was hoping you would wake up soon." Fluttershy drifted into the room silently. It seemed to Sombra that her host barely touched the ground. She wore a small apron that had a few smears of dust on it. Her own appearance was, as usual, flawless. "Your room is almost ready, Your Majesty." Sombra glanced down the hall and saw warm light spilling from an open door further in that they had not noticed before. "I assume it's suitable." At this point he had begun to simply expect her compliance as well as excellence of behavior. "It is the best I could provide, but it is a room for your Majesty. It also had a window with a nice view of the forest. I set new drapes and moved the furniture about to accommodate the mattress. First thing tomorrow I'll go into town and see about a new bed frame." Fluttershy rattled off each nuance as if she had been serving royalty her entire life. Sombra could find no fault in her technique, so he simply nodded and lifted himself from the mattress. Fluttershy moved with a grace to seize the mattress and move it to the back door for a quick airing out before dragging it back to the guest room. She had apparently spent the day preparing. Sombra found himself amused by watching the dainty Pegasus mare move the large, unyielding slab of fabric and down around her house with little difficulty. Her teeth found small grips on the edge of the mattress that allowed her purchase, while what could only have been a great deal of practice allowed her to handle the weight with ease, allowing it to mostly move itself by guiding its momentum. All the while she avoided the various pieces of furniture and decorative crockery that was set about her house. Finally, Fluttershy emerged from the room, having apparently fixed the mattress in an acceptable position. Stopping in front of Sombra, she performed a flawless bow and curtsy, flirting her rings out slightly as she did. "The room is fully prepared to the best of my abilities, Your Majesty." Fluttershy spoke softly, her gaze fixed somewhere around his fetlocks. "There is a shop in town where I can acquire a bed frame, but for now, I'm afraid I only have the mattress to offer you again, as my own bed would be far too small and uncomfortable for a stallion of heroic proportions." "This little mare might be the most inoffensive creature I've ever encountered," Sombra mused as he favored his newest servant with a faint nod. "For once I can barely even imagine myself becoming wrath with her." "If I may ask, Your Majesty," Fluttershy began before trailing off. Sombra gave another small nod of assent. "I'm certain the rest of Ponyville will think it strange for me to be buying a large bed. Everyone knows I live out here alone, after all, and even Ponyville, few visitors rarely come near the Everfree." "I have already taken that into consideration, little mouse," Sombra replied thoughtfully as he moved to inspect his new chambers. They were tastefully appointed and had the scent of a recent and thorough cleaning. Small by his usual standards, but acceptable. "If asked, you will say you have a guest staying with you. Do try and avoid too much conversation, but if pressed, you may tell him I'm a crystal pony researcher by the name of Cole Amax, here to study the indigenous wildlife of the Everfree." "I see." Fluttershy's next words came out carefully. "If I'm not being too bold, may I ask why a researcher? Every pony in this area knows how dangerous the forest is." Sombra turned his head to fix one dark eye onto Fluttershy and gave her a feigned grin. "Very simple, in case I require an alibi, dear mouse." For a moment, Sombra considered leaving it at that, but for some reason, felt no need to hide his intentions. After all, it wasn't as though she could betray him anyway, and his long isolation has left him feeling unusually loquistic. "I stored a large amount of material goods in a small hidden shrine in the Everfree. Not even the royal pony sisters knew of it. After all, what kind of mad pony would hide in the very shadow of their own castle?" Fluttershy stifled a gasp, instead opting to just nod along. I don't want any pony asking too many questions about a strange dark stallion seen going into and out of the forest after all. Sombra continued as he trotted back into the living room and then out the back door with Fluttershy trailing behind him. If asked, you may furnish the answer I've given you. Now, Mouse, I am feeling a little stronger, so I'm going to retrieve some of my belongings. Ensure there's a suitable repast for me when I return. Sombra spoke without turning his head to Fluttershy. There was, however, a dark flash from his horn that caused the young Pegasus to flinch in alarm momentarily. Fluttershy glanced around in confusion, but no dark shadows erupted from the earth to devour her. Then she saw the small sack that had appeared between her forelegs. I have provided you a small stipend to refill your pantry according to my needs, Sombra remarked as he evaluated the forest with a critical eye. Do not disappoint me, Mouse. Then he was gone. Unlike Twilight, Sombra's teleportation wasn't accompanied by a flash of light or any noise. He was simply there one moment and gone the next. Only the faint glimmer of dark energy remained for a brief few seconds. Somehow, Fluttershy thought to herself as she stared at space, Sombra had been occupying a moment before. The quiet way he vanishes like that is actually scarier than a loud sound. He can teleport into a dark room and no one would notice. He could teleport into my bedroom while I'm asleep and... Fluttershy's brain pulled a full stop, and she shook her head violently to banish the mental image that accompanied that thought. Blushing was exactly the wrong reaction to that notion. Fear, yes. Gut-wrenching terror, even. Certainly not whatever that was. More and more, Fluttershy was beginning to suspect that Sombra's guise had done more to her mind than he was telling her. Yes, he's handsome, she grudgingly admitted to herself, but he's also keeping us hostage through evil magic and forcing us to lie to our friends, and wait on him fetlock and hoof. Not that the service part felt particularly bad. In fact, it almost scared Fluttershy how easily she slipped into the role. She had learned the mindset of a careered servant from birth by watching her father and mother. That was part of it. But the ease with which she accepted his orders, a part of her knew that she enjoyed being useful to others, and that meant she enjoyed being useful to him. Annoyingly, the thought didn't sicken her as much as she felt it ought to. There was nothing wrong with a life of service, though. Her whole family lived to serve, after all. Fluttershy rolled her eyes as she thought about her family. Father would be so proud that you ended up in the family business after all. He and Mother had supported her choice of profession, of course, but there was no hiding the slight disappointment in their faces. Gathering up her wicker shopping basket and throwing on a scarf, Fluttershy started the leisurely walk into town. It was still a couple hours until supper, and she wasn't planning anything extravagant. A nice tossed salad and chilled artichoke soup sounded quite good to her. The walk itself was uneventful, and the town of Ponyville was just beginning to fade into the quiet evening state of most small villages. Mentally mapping out where the various vendors would be at this time of day, Fluttershy took a quick left into the market square, towards one of the largest stalls to pick up some fresh romaine. Hopefully Sombra wouldn't mind. Romaine was her favorite, and he hadn't mentioned any dietary preferences. Fluttershy was hoofing through the heads of lettuce, distractedly, when a voice started her out of her reverie. "You all right there, Sugar Cube?" Applejack asked, her brow furrowed slightly as she backed up a step. "I called out to you, but you looked mighty distracted." Fluttershy shook her head. "I'm sorry, I've been busy. How was business today?" Applejack grinned. The one thing guaranteed to distract Applejack was talk shop. "Sold out. Good thing harvest is coming up here pretty soon. Rainbow already counting down the days to cider season." "No change there, then," Fluttershy giggled lightly. "I'm glad things are going well, though." Say, Flutters, that was a doozy of a storm last night, by the by." Applejack shot a scowl in the direction of the Everfree. "I admit it was a little worried about you. I know I probably weather storms like that more often than most ponies, but I just wanted you to know I'm right glad you're okay. Was actually planning on stopping by after I closed up shop." A shot of panic lanced through Fluttershy's mind, but she kept her face even with some effort. "Oh, that's very nice of you, but I'm fine. It just scared some of the little animals and knocked down some bird feeders. Everything was fine." Why did it have to be Applejack's shit she ran into? She loved her friends, but it was also so hard to lie to her as it was for Applejack to lie to, well, anyone. The oldest Apple sister was notoriously bad poker face. Fluttershy desperately wanted to tell Applejack everything right then and there, but she could feel the pounding presence of the guys even as the notion crossed her mind. If she tried to warn Applejack, not only would she not get the words out, but she didn't want to think what the state Sombra spell would leave her in. Applejack gave Fluttershy an odd look, and for a second, Fluttershy both hoped and dreaded that her dishonesty had been discovered. Then Applejack shrugged and nodded. "Yeah, the orchard nearest the forest got hit pretty hard, but nothing we can't recover from. Good to know everything's alright, though, Circa Cube. I'll let the rest of the girls know." "Okay." Fluttershy waved nervously as Applejack meandered back to her half-dismantled stall. As soon as she was out of earshot, Fluttershy scurried up her muzzle and snorted. "Oh, shoot. Well, back to Plan A. Try and reform the Mad King Sombra with the magic of friendship. And chilled artichoke soup." Turning back around, Fluttershy picked up some choice vegetables and a few tomatoes to go on to the salad. She had most of the ingredients for the soup in her icebox and pantry, but as Sombra had said, she needed to stock up and refill. She was cooking for two now, after all. By the time she finished, she knew she was bordering on running late. Her conversation with Applejack had taken up a little more time than what she expected. Foregoing her usual slow trot, Fluttershy carefully cantered back to her cottage and slipped inside. It was thankfully empty. She still had half an hour before supper was served, so she put whatever she knew she wouldn't use away and pulled out the ingredients for the soup. It would need time to chill, so she wanted to make it first. Hopefully Sombra didn't hate artichoke.